What's up, SCS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And I just have to take one moment to thank all of SCS Nation. There's really no way to do that properly. As you all know, my father, and some of you may not know, my father passed away a week ago. It's been a very difficult, really challenging week, especially for my mother. And it's just no way to know how to rebound after you lose a guy that my mother's been with for 65 years and I've been with for 53 years. So it's really tough. The best thing I can do right now is to get back into the podcast. And without crying here, I just want to let you know, and without sounding corny, that I feel like we've really built something amazing here with STS Nation. It's incredible what you guys did. I have not had time to read a lot or respond, but I will respond to everybody. People even sent baked goods. It was amazing, and it really, really, really touched both my mother and me. So I can't thank you guys enough. And it has um, rejuvenated my belief in humanity and mankind, that there, for all the bad we talk about in true crime, people are really good at their core, and you guys are the best of the best. So thank you so much. And like I said, I will get back to everyone who has written to me. It might take me a week or 2 weeks, but I will get back to you. And thanks again from the bottom of our hearts. Today, we dive back into the Lori Vallow Daybell story as her long-awaited murder trial now began inside an Idaho courtroom with the first day of jury selection. The trial of the so-called Doomsday Mom is the wildly twisted story of a seemingly loving mother, a devout member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who becomes involved in the deaths of as many as 5 people, including her own children. A very sordid tale. We are going to be joined momentarily, I hope, by Jessica Bublitz, who is a skilled litigator and a Boise-based attorney who's tried numerous cases in both state and federal courts. She is the first woman in Idaho to be named a top 100 trial lawyer by the National Trial Lawyers. Back on the show, we have Lori Vallow. So I'm grateful for being here. She's an author and a retired criminal defense attorney. She has a blog and is currently writing a book about Lori Vallow Daybell. The blog is The Lori Vallow Story. She's in Boise, I believe, right now, and is attending and writing about the trial. She says she wants to understand this perfect storm of people and circumstances that culminated in this horrific ending to this tale. And then we've got Dr. Christina Marinakis, Dr. M, back on the show. She has 20 years, more than 20 years of jury research, study, and applied practice on law and psychology. And she has worked pro bono cases, assisting on big cases like Minnesota versus Derek Chauvin, and more recently assisting the plaintiffs in Vanessa Bryant versus the County of Los Angeles. Just a super quick reminder. It's important to me. I wrote the eulogy for my father. I'm going to post that on Instagram and on Facebook. He was a special guy with a lot of special messages. He was an intellectual, but broke things down very simply. So I talked about that, and I'll post it. You can find that at Surviving the Survivor on Instagram and on Facebook and Twitter. It's too long, but we're at Podcast STS. But without further ado, Lori, to you, were you able to get into the actual courtroom today, and what was it like? Just give us some flavor of what it was like inside today.
Well, no one was allowed in the actual courtroom today because they're doing jury selection, and there are portions of that jury, those jury questions that are not public. So there were a couple of opportunities for the court to shut down the, thank you, Sarah. There was a couple of opportunities where the court closed down the live feed because they were having questions having to do with both questioning jurors on what they knew already about the case, and so not wanting other jurors to overhear those sorts of questions. And then some more personal questions having to do with whether or not they had experience in some of the issues that are going on in the case. One of the examples was, perhaps a juror has lost a child, and perhaps that might not make them the most appropriate juror, and those sorts of questions. So there were these two different lines of questioning, one about personal matters and then the other about what publicity they had seen. So we were in the county commissioner's chambers, which is a large room with lots of chairs in it, and there were probably 40 to 50 people in and out over the day.
So that's a good amount. And I was following a lot of the day, both you and Gigi McKelvey, of course, who's with Pretty Lies and Alibis, and she's covering this for the Law and Crime Network. She tells me that they got 3 groups in today, and they wanted to get 4 groups. They can recall group 4 if needed, they're saying. Dr. M, no one knows more about jury selection than you do. Does it sound like the process is off to a smooth start? Of course, we know in the Alec Murdaugh trial, I believe they picked a jury within 3 days. Here, I don't think it's going to be quite as streamlined. And again, there's no cameras in this courtroom, so we're relying on people like Lori and Gigi McKelvey to give us this information. But from what you can ascertain so far, Dr. M, does it seem like it's off to a good start?
That seems pretty typical. One thing to know is that every state's going to handle the jury selection process a little differently. But whenever you're dealing with a high profile case, you're going to have usually pretty extensive questioning of the jurors. And there's a lot of areas that people need to learn about. And one of those is mental health issues. And that's not something that people tend to want to talk about in front of other jurors. So I'd imagine that there's several people that are on the panel right now, prospective jurors that may have mental health issues or feelings about the church that they need to talk about privately. So I would expect this one to be a little bit more drawn out.
And I think we have Jessica. Are you there?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Beautiful. Happy to have you. Jessica, again, is a Boise, Idaho-based attorney, and she knows the law in the epicenter of this trial. Jessica, you were not in court today, were you?
I tried. So
tell us what happened
today at about 10 this morning. It was quieter than I thought it would be. I will say, outside the courthouse and in the courthouse as well. You could tell there was a little extra security only because I'm so familiar with what the normal security looks like. Could I tell? I don't think that a normal person would have even been able to tell that there was a whole lot of extra security there. And to the right, they had a booth checking in people who were on a list who could go into the main, it's usually like a place where they do, what would you call it? It's like a convention center, but not as big, but they also do hearings in there, local government type hearings and things like that. It's not a courtroom, but in that room is where they had the streaming. And on the list, you had to be on the list in order to get into that room. And so I bypassed that, and then I went to see where the real courtroom was that it was in. And normally there's like a big airport looking terminal where you have the judge's name and then you have the courtroom that each judge is in. And everybody's there like normal, except Vallow is not there. It's not listed. The judge is not listed. It's completely hidden. And so I found that kind of odd. And so I called my assistant and I said, do you know what courtroom Vallow's in today? And she said, well, I heard it was on the 4th floor. But I'll check. And so I went up to the 4th floor, and to the left, you could see that there was a little blockade that's not normally there. So I'm like, oh, well, I guess I know what courtroom it's in. And so I went around the blockade, and I knew that it was going to be in courtroom 400, which is actually a really nice courtroom on the end of the 4th floor. And outside of the courtroom was a guard who had a list of people allowed into the courtroom. And he said, are you on the list? And I said, no, I'm not on the list. And he said, are you with the prosecutor's office? And I said, no, I'm actually just a regular old defense attorney, but I'm here every day. Can I go in? And he said, no, not unless you're on the list, but I'm happy to add you if you get TCA to admit you. And which, let me just say, I had a trial there last Thursday and Friday. I did my jury selection on Thursday. There were plenty of people allowed into my jury selection. Okay. So it is not normal to not have an open courtroom for jury selection. And so I said, well, shouldn't it be an open courtroom? Shouldn't I be allowed to go in just to see the proceedings? And he said, nope, not unless you're on the list. And he, he was nice about it. So I called my assistant. I said, can you get me on the list? And she said, they're not letting anyone into the actual courtroom, but into the streamed courtroom, we can get you on the list for tomorrow. They're apparently not very full today, but I guess you have to be on it 24 hours in advance. So I wasn't able to get on today's list at all, but I'm on it for tomorrow. So tomorrow I can pop in whenever I want, apparently, into the streaming room, not into the main courtroom.
And now I know I need to get you back on tomorrow night. So you just you shot yourself in the foot right there. But,
yeah,
but now great. I know who to go to.
Yeah. And I think my annoyance was just that it's being treated differently than a regular case. I mean, I understand, okay, you know how I feel about not allowing the cameras into the courtroom. I'm against that. But the fact that they're treating it as more exclusive than your regular court proceeding is bizarre to me. I mean, not posting where it is, not listing the judge like you normally would, posting a guard outside the courtroom door. I mean, that's all way out of pocket.
Yeah. And Lori, I think you even filed a motion over the camera issue. And Lori, you're covering this. You're planning to write a book. I'm sure you're a decent way into it. By the way, happy to see Shaquille Oatmeal, my favorite name, is back after our hiatus. So thank you guys again. Carmen, I said, are these guys going to be back in a week if we're away? And people are back, and we love you guys. And thank you so much. Again, I can't tell you how much it means. Also, I love the fact that Lori Hellis is the good Lori. So to the good Lori, is it a source of anxiety that you're covering this and you don't know if you're getting in or not getting in day to day? And what happened with those motions? I assume nothing, since we're just getting courtroom sketches at this point in tweets.
So my motions had to do with the judge sealing documents in advance of the trial and sealing pretrial proceedings. The judge allowed a couple of motions that he felt that he had maybe improperly sealed or unintentionally sealed, let's put it that way, allowed those released. But no, for the most part, he did not release documents. And I'm very interested to see what's in those documents once the trial is over, because I suspect that there were some things in those documents that didn't have any business being sealed, but would have been quite interesting to the to reporters and to the public. I will say that unlike Ada County in Boise, the courts in both Fremont and Madison County are pretty insulated, it's a pretty serious good old boy network, and it's made even more insulated by the fact that about 96% of the population in those two counties are members of the LDS Church. So there's a huge, the BYU Idaho is there and has somewhere around 20,000 students. So that swells the local population somewhat, but the bulk of the people who live in those two counties are members of the church. And while I don't think that the LDS Church writ large, the monolithic organization from Salt Lake City is exerting any kind of influence over the case, I haven't turned up any evidence that that's going on. I do think that it is a culture that encourages secrecy, that encourages I would say, very insular kinds of relationships. So if you're not a member of the church, you're not privy to as much information. And I think that just spills over into the justice system as well out there.
Obviously, the bad Lori is going to be scrutinized every way, every which way. And we know from the court sketches that she came into court today, Dr. Marinakis, looking demure. She was wearing a blue shirt with a black cardigan and glasses. How important is it for the defense to dress their defendant in a proper manner?
It is important, but it's important not to overdo it as well. So if I'm working with a criminal defense person, you want it to be the an image that is different than what they're trying to be depicted as. So usually we try to avoid dark colors like blacks and grays and try to use softer colors, the pinks and the blues and the tans. We generally recommend that the women wear their hair down because it's a softer look. But you also have to be careful that you don't overdo it. You know, with Vanessa, for example, there was some suggestion that maybe she shouldn't go and wear her makeup, you know, and that's not who she is. And jurors would have been able to spot that it was fake. If you remember in the Johnny Depp case, Amber Heard there was wearing was dressed like a nun every day and looked absolutely ridiculous because everyone knows that she doesn't dress like that in real life. So you have to dress softer, but you also have to not look like you're overdoing it or trying too hard. But it's certainly something that they should be thinking of.
And Lori, people were tweeting at Gigi, whose Twitter feed I scoured. And someone's
She's
asking,
sitting right next to me
right now.
She was sitting right next to me.
Oh, right in the courtroom. Oh, okay. And by the way, someone's just asking right here, I believe. Oh, that's the wrong one. Someone asked, good Lori, did you see Gigi today? Obviously she did.
Yep.
And David writes, great to see you, Joel. Again, great to see you, David. I appreciate it. But someone tweeted at her and said, hey, what's the deal? Does she have her makeup on? What's going on with the hair? And Gigi tweeted back, hair is curly, cannot see well enough for makeup. So you guys are basically in a viewing room watching on Zoom, not unlike we're looking at each other right now. What was that setup like for you? From a tactile standpoint, it's obviously very different than seeing the defendant in the actual courtroom, right?
Yeah, I've been to Rexburg on several occasions to see her in court, see them in court. The Fremont County Courthouse is much smaller, so it's definitely a more, I don't want to say intimate, but a closer environment. So in this case, we're in this big city council chambers. There's probably room for 200 chairs in there, so it's a good size room. And then there's a big kind of screen, like a folding screen, and it's being projected on that great big screen. There are 3 cameras, one facing the judge, one facing the prosecution, and one facing the defense table. All of them are fairly far away. Now, there was some controversy in Fremont County before the judge said no cameras, because the camera was focused on her almost exclusively throughout a whole hearing, similar to what we saw in the Murdaugh case, where the camera was pretty much trained on Alec Murdaugh the whole time. And her attorneys complained about that, and that was when we had the dust up over cameras, and the judge said no more cameras. So now everything's very far away. So not only is it being projected on a large screen, but the cameras are pretty far away. So we get a whole view of the counsel table, the 3 lawyers sitting there, a fair amount of expanse on either side. And so we don't have a very good view of anybody's facial expressions or whether she has on makeup or not. We don't know. I was told the Ada County jail tends to be a little stricter about those sort of grooming opportunities than maybe Fremont County was. I will say that in the times that I have seen her in court, she's always been in either a pink or a baby blue long sleeve blouse, very feminine, ruffles and dark slacks and like little heeled ankle boots. So I was surprised today to see her in a dark cardigan, but it may have just been the courthouse was cold because it's cold here.
Little Nikki writes, it's so disappointing that this trial is not televised. So much of how this case is being handled is frustrating. I remain hopeful for justice, as I think everyone else does. Jessica, you've been in that courtroom a lot, and you were in there, I think, as recently as last week, where you got a not guilty verdict because you're the creme de la creme of Boise, Idaho defense attorneys. And by the way, Jessica, I was told, and I'm remembering this from a week ago, it's not Boise with a Z, but Boise. So I will try to pronounce that.
Boise.
I get tripped up with Moscow, and now it's Boise. So I will not. I will try not to say the Z, but I'm a Jersey guy, so that's hard for me. You're very familiar, as is Dr. Marinakis, but I think you're more familiar with this specific jurisdiction. What goes into these questionnaires? Because there were questionnaires issued last week, and now these are the jurors that passed through those questionnaires successfully. So what sorts of things are they asking in those questionnaires? And I'll take everybody to some questions that were asked today.
Yeah, if they're doing everything the same as they normally do, not a whole lot. The questions that we get in your typical case, and the case that I had last week was a felony, but so it shouldn't be treated any differently. But I feel like the Vallow Daybell case is being treated differently. But if it goes like a normal case, then they just ask for the age, occupation, spouse's occupation, how long they've lived in Idaho. And they used to ask a question, friend of law enforcement, which was a kind of an interesting one because it kind of gave you a window into whether or not the person saw themselves with more of a conservative bent or not. It gave you a little bit of an idea there. They've taken that question off. I don't know when they did that. And that may be it. So really, children, how many children do you have? So there's really not a whole lot there. And then the judge can kind of tailor the voir dire how they want to. The judge can either decide to do a lot of the voir dire themselves on some of the basic questions where you're trying to get some information just for cause. They have standard questions they might ask, like, if it's a certain type of case, they might say, is there anyone who feels that they can't sit on this type of case for any reason, that they can't be fair because of the type of case that this is? Things like that. Or do any of you know any of the parties involved? Do any of you have an opinion formed already as to the guilt or innocence? Just some very basic things that they go through first. But the attorneys really don't have a whole lot of information about the people. There's not a lot that you can tell just by someone's age and how long they've lived in the area about that person or how many kids they have. So you really do need to get into some more personal questions to really get an idea of who these people are. And that's probably, from what I can tell, they haven't gotten too personal yet. I read a little brief summary of what was asked, and it looks like so far they've only gotten through the basic judge's questions, and then the defense attorneys have had a little bit of a chance to ask, and prosecution and defense have both only had a little chance to ask things like, have you formed an opinion already as to this case? I don't know that am I right that they didn't allow press in there or anybody to watch the individual questioning of the jurors, that they decided to do that without anybody seeing what those questions were? So that's really where they're going to get to know these people. And unfortunately, it looks like they're
Lori,
doing that.
They cut the stream at that point. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
So they did ask, the defense and prosecution both got an opportunity to talk about things like reasonable doubt and circumstantial evidence and a few other questions that help sort of educate the jury. And then one of the things that was in the jury questionnaire was a witness list, because the judge sealed the witness lists, mostly for the privacy of the witnesses, I think. So they did include a witness list. So there were some questions about, do you know any of these people? Are you related to any of them? There were a couple of jurors. One juror said she supervised the laundry at the jail. And so she had inmates that worked for her in the laundry. So she had that kind of inmate contact. And her husband also works for the sheriff's department, but wasn't clear in what kind of a role, non-law enforcement. And there was also another person who had a different connection to city government, I think. So I suspected they probably were people who wouldn't remain on the jury. But,
and Lori, what do you attribute the low turnout to this morning? Because this is obviously one of the more high-profile cases that we're going to see this year. Is it just because we're just kind of it hasn't really begun in earnest? Is that why media hasn't arrived necessarily? The courtroom's not packed. But why do you think it was such a paltry turnout?
Because jury selection's boring. I mean, it is.
Yeah.
For those of us that are involved in the system, it's critically important. And so we forget that the average person's like, yeah, ho hum, they have 3 kids. You know, I mean, it to the average person, it's kind of dull. So
don't tell Dr. Marinakis that.
I have
do it every day. Yeah, but no, yeah. I mean, if you think of the jurors that they're talking to, I think they summoned something like 1,800 jurors. Only 12 of them are going to really matter at the end. And so there's a lot of discussion that's going on that is really going to have absolutely no relevance to this case or impact.
And my understanding is that it's their intention to question and clear of cause and hardship 42, and then they will narrow it down. So yeah, from 1,800, they've winnowed that down at least in half by people who either didn't show up or expressed either a clear opinion on the case or that they had some hardship. So there were
Lori, one juror who was a potential juror who kind of, for lack of a better term, passed the questionnaire phrase, didn't show up today.
Right.
What are the repercussions for not showing up if you're summoned to court?
Well, it sort of depends on how serious the judge and the jury coordinator want to get, because they can be held in contempt for not appearing for a legal summons. But in reality, does that happen a lot? No, not really. Only because it's a resource issue. I mean, does the court really want to expend their resources chasing down a recalcitrant juror who probably isn't going to be happy about participating in the process anyway?
Well, I guess it's safe to say that juror is not going to be part of the jury pool. KCL,
Yes.
who's a friend of the show, writes, Jessica, they say jury selection is going faster than expected in this trial so far. We already mentioned it off the top. In the Alec Murdaugh trial, a jury was seated, I think, within 3 days. They say that Boise is going to be slower. What are you making of the process on day one? Is it moving at a faster clip than you would expect, or no?
I think it's moving about like I would expect it to move right now. I will say that I don't know the players involved like I normally would. So I don't know what the expectations are. These are people coming in from another county, a totally different type of culture legally than what I'm used to. Small counties like that are going to do things very differently. I would have expected them to maybe be a little slower just because I don't know. That would have been my guess, is that this prosecutor and these defense attorneys would have taken a lot of extra time to go through some of the more basic questions than they have. But I think it's moving along at a very steady, normal pace from what I can tell. We'll see. I mean, how much more questioning do they need to go into? Tomorrow is going to be interesting because they might get into more of the interesting questions. Right now, it seems to me like they've just covered some of the basic questions and they're just knocking off people who for cause. But everybody is right now for the most part, saying they can be fair, from what I read. And that's a little unusual, because usually you get a few people at least who say, I can't be fair. I've already sort of made up my mind. I don't really think that I can weigh the evidence. I feel so horrible about a mother who could have done this to her kids that I think that I'm not a good juror for you. I mean, usually you get quite a few people who are like that. And then you can strike them for cause in the beginning. And that's not really happening. And I don't know if that's because they're not asking the questions to really pull that out of people in an honest way, or if it's because people are kind of fascinated by the case and realize that if they say that, they're going to be pulled, and they don't want to be. I don't know.
And Dr. Marinakis, what about ulterior motives? We saw this again in the Alec Murdaugh trial. You know, you get on that juror, those jurors were flown up to New York. They appeared on the Today Show. People here are across the board saying they don't have a problem being jurors for the most part. Do you have to be extra cautious and aware and cognizant because some people may try to get on the jury because you could potentially get a book deal afterwards? You can get on the Today Show. You can live a life of celebrity and glamour. You can get your 15 minutes of fame by being here. Is that a problem and something that you, if you're consulting, need to look at especially carefully?
It is. And there's sort of a tell sometimes. Like, for example, I had a trial just this past week where a juror put a hardship on their questionnaire, said they wouldn't get paid for their jury service. And so they were asking essentially to be excused. But once they got in the courtroom and they saw the cameras, they said, oh, it's okay. I've got a savings I can dip into. I think I'll be able to manage it. And so when someone is changing their position from the questionnaire to what they're saying in court, that to me sets off alarm bells. And that was someone that I definitely did not want on that jury. So I think they need to be listening to that. Are people saying things that are inconsistent with what's written on their questionnaire or what's being posted on their social media as well? I definitely would be going into people's social media accounts and looking at what the things that they're posting. Did they seem like someone who's following true crime? That might be another thing that sets off those alarm bells, but something that both sides should be concerned about.
And Ann Vroom, a friend of the show, and I love her last name because it makes me feel like you want to go. Vroom, vroom, vroom. Question for Lori Hellis here. Did it seem like the defense was being more aggressive than the state about striking jurors per voir dire? Thank you.
I think that's a little hard to tell because so much of what happened was when they got into the sort of more in-depth questioning was happening outside of what we could see. I will say that toward the end of the day, that this, I think it was the second group, may have been the third, there were some challenges for cause. So I'm presuming it's because they were people who'd already formed an opinion about the case. There were a couple of jurors in the first group who had said on their questionnaires, oh, it would be a hardship for me to serve 8 weeks on a jury, and who now were saying, oh, well, I have it handled now. So you're right. I think when they discovered it was this high profile case, they were more interested. I don't know what that means, whether it means that they just are more interested in the case or if it means that they're interested in the notoriety of it.
Yeah, and I don't think necessarily every juror is out to get the book deal or to show up on TV, but there is something about being involved in something that is meaningful, that they've heard about, that is much more interesting than your run-of-the-mill, car accident case that they might otherwise get called for.
Sure.
Summer Golden writes, Gigi said there weren't many potential jurors who had any clue about this case. Maybe the jury selection will go faster than expected. Jessica, does this surprise you? That's question number one. The second question to you, are all your colleagues, fellow attorneys, I keep bringing them up because it was just the most recent trial, but you could not find an attorney in South Carolina that wasn't watching the trial all day. I don't think law got done in the state of South Carolina for those 6 weeks because they were literally all watching it all day long. Is it the same sense in Boise? And do you buy that these jurors, a bunch of them, had just never heard about it?
It's not the same sense here in Boise. There's definitely an interest, but it's not that kind of an interest. I think a lot of that had to do that it was one of their own. It was one of their own attorneys who was on trial. So, plus it was this this notorious family who everybody kind of knew about in the area. There was a certain celebrity-ish factor there that went into that trial. So I do think that a lot of the attorneys, the local attorneys, were fascinated by that. I don't get the same sense here that there's a lot of total fascination by the lawyers. Idaho is not a celebrity culture compared to the rest of the United States. It's just not all that interested in things that hit the mainstream. It's not. I believe that culturally it functions a little differently here in Idaho. And I don't know why that is, but there's a little more of a just sense of privacy, a sense of do your own thing. So, I feel like for the most part, you're not going to see that much interest from the local legal community. You're going to see some. I mean, they're definitely aware of it. They're aware that it's going to be happening in their courthouse. They're a little aware that things might be less convenient than they normally would be, that things are a little more crowded, that they've had to shuffle things around, things like that. But a total fascination of the case itself, not completely. And as far as the, I think you were asking about whether or not everyone knows, if I'm surprised the community maybe isn't as aware of it. Not really. Eastern Idaho is Eastern Idaho. This is a very different type of community than that is. And I don't think, from the outside, Idaho is Idaho. People who don't know Idaho think of it as one way or one thing. But really, it's not like that at all. And East Idaho is a lot more like Utah or even Wyoming, some of these other areas, than it is Boise. So they're going to find a fair jury. I guarantee you that. They're going to find people who maybe even haven't heard too much about this case, but are willing to hear and weigh the evidence. I don't think it's going to be like it would have been in East Idaho as far as everyone knowing everything about the case.
Ashley English writes, I was surprised at the lack of people there. Again, hasn't really gotten underway in earnest. Jennifer with a shout out to Jessica. KCL, once again, echoing the sentiments of all. I hope these potential jurors are being honest. Dr. Marinakis, to you, this is standard to you, but I found it an interesting question. Do you watch CSI? That was one of the questions they were asking today. Another question that the prosecuting attorney asked was, can you be brutally honest? They also made the analogy of being a pilot of a plane. You've got to be able to pilot this plane. Are these all kind of typical things that we hear in the voir dire process when they're trying to figure out who they want as jurors, particularly the CSI question?
Yeah, so the CSI question is usually looking for jurors who are going to require there to be DNA evidence and case closed evidence, which usually you don't want that if you're on the defense side. You want people to maybe, or if you're on the prosecution side and you don't have really strong evidence there or DNA evidence, you want to find out who are the people that are watching those types of Law and Order shows. The people who watch the Law and Order shows usually lean pro-prosecution. So you're trying to learn that and learn what people's expectation is of the evidence. The pilot question is one I hear all the time, but that's really a question that's asked to try to save jurors. So not get them excused for cause, but you're trying to encourage the juror to say that they can be fair. So I've heard that question many times. There was one that was used in the George Floyd trial as well. And then, and what was the other one that you said?
Brutally honest.
Brutally honest, again, is sort of the same thing. It's the lawyers trying to get out from the jurors. Can you tell us and tell us your feelings about things, because that's what we need to hear. But there's always a pull and a push when it comes to jury selection. I know we ultimately all want a fair jury, but if you're for one side or the other, you don't want a fair jury. You want a jury that's biased in favor of your side. So you're trying to save the people that you think are in your favor, and you're trying to get rid of the people that you don't. And then if each side does its job, that ends up with a fair jury in the end.
786 writes, and good Lori, this is about bad Lori for you. How did Lori look? We talked about what she was wearing, a blue shirt with a black cardigan with like reading glasses, but how did she look overall to you? Did she look confident? Did she look dejected? Did she look interested, disinterested?
Well, I noticed that she was taking a lot of notes, and Jessica will tell you this is something lawyers do. They assign their client the job of keeping notes or jotting down impressions of jurors, and those are things.
I don't like that. Let me just jump in there. I think it's a bad idea because then they can see what your client's reacting to, right? People think that they are not,
right.
And I always tell my clients, look, do something where you do a little experiment with yourself. You're sitting there across the table from somebody. Somebody says something really bad about you, and they know you can't respond, and you start writing very strongly on your pad. You're reacting to that. You're giving them some sort of information that I don't necessarily want you to give them. So no, I don't like for my client, and it just gives them a chance to give something away about themselves, how they're feeling and what they're thinking that I don't like. So, but yeah, some do. So they gave her a notepad to write on.
Yeah, she was definitely making notes, talking to mostly John Thomas because Jim Archibald was at the podium. But yeah, she was making comments and clearly writing notes. And so she was engaged, and I think that's what people really want to know because of her history of mental health issues. Was she engaged, and did she appear that she was tracking? And she did.
She did. And Lori, you're also obviously an attorney in addition to writing a book about this, and the Lori Vallow story is your blog, which everyone should check out. But in your past history, what sorts of notes would your clients take? What sorts of things are they looking at? I mean, she's not an attorney, so what is she flagging for her defense team?
Potentially, it just could be she's keeping track of juror numbers and what they're wearing, and maybe answers to some basic questions. It could be that simple of just sort of keeping track of which juror is which. So, I mean, it just depends on the lawyer and the client, but a lot of lawyers do ask their clients to sort of keep track of those things because it's one less thing the lawyer has to keep track of. So,
and Lori, just to this point here, Jenny Meow Meow, right? Sounds like Judge Boyce made a lot of decisions with the powers of paranoia and subterfuge. You agree with this comment?
Is that for me?
It is for you because I directed it at you. It wasn't for you necessarily, but I'd love for you to react to it. This is the comment.
I think that Judge Boyce is a very new judge. He was a magistrate, essentially handling lower level offenses, misdemeanors, restraining orders, civil cases under $10,000, I think. So he was elevated to the district court. Is that right, Jessica? I want to
That's right.
Because the state I'm from, district court was a magistrate. So
okay.
He was elevated to the district court in late 2019 and had tried a handful of felony cases before COVID hit and everything shut down. So then they were limited to doing Zoom hearings for almost a year. So I think that's part of it. I think there's a part of him that is concerned for maybe his own appearance, but I think there's also a part of him that's trying to preserve the case so that he's not overturned on appeal. So I think it's unfortunate that he has gone as far into keeping things sealed and secret as he has, because really all that does, we've seen that in the Brian Koberger case, all that does is fuel speculation when the truth is probably more boring.
Yeah, there's this undertone of you can't trust the people, right? Oh, let's keep it from the people. Let's not tell them where it's at. Let's not tell them what courtroom it's in. Let's guard it. Oh, the population is going to do something with this information, or they're going to do something with to me, it's almost condescending to the population in a sense that they can't handle the information, or they can't handle seeing everything or where it is. And that's what's somewhat offensive, because the whole point of the justice system being open and being transparent is being thwarted with that attitude. And I think that they're missing out on what actually makes the justice system great. And that's having everybody participate, having everybody have a say, having everybody have some sort of idea of fairness and the fact that it's being done fairly. So to me, I don't even know if it's so much about his concern for himself. It could be, but I doubt it. I really think it's more to do with their overriding desire, just that, though, the little people don't need to know. Everybody's interested, but yeah, they're not on a need to know basis.
Real quick, just a quick reminder, tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern time, we've got Dave Leroy, who is the former lieutenant governor and the former attorney general of the great state of Idaho. He's coming on with Tara Malik, who is a criminal defense attorney in Idaho as well, who's been on the show before for the Brian Koberger case. And we've also got Jean Fisher, a former prosecutor. She was a prosecutor for 33 years. So another very seasoned panel tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern time. So please join us then. Also, since we were gone for a week, if you could please hit that like button, it would go a long way, because, those YouTube algorithms, they need to get chugging, and hitting that like button always helps a lot. Sarah Adams writes, why is everything to do with Lori done in secrecy, and why does she always get her way? Jessica Bublitz, is this a true statement? And if so, that's problematic, isn't it?
Well, it's definitely the impression that we were getting from the Madison County situation, for sure, with the makeup and the fact that, like, we were talking about how when she didn't want the cameras in the courtroom because it was making her look bad, frankly, and her attorneys asked for those cameras to be taken out of the courtroom because they didn't like that it was unflattering to their client. There seemed to be a definite treatment there that I don't see on a regular basis with anybody ever. But I was pretty sure when she moved over here to Ada County that was gone, that was going to be gone by the wayside. And I don't know if you saw that, if you were able to see that in the courtroom. But my guess is there won't be the access to any of those things. I know that they can curl their hair by braiding it if it's wet, or wrapping it around jail bars, things like that if it's wet. So I think that there are ways to get the hair curl effect. But I don't think there are going to be ways for her to get any of the other special treatment that she seemed to have been receiving when she was in Madison County. And she was in a pod with, from what I understand, regular women of 20 people when she was in Madison County. So she was being treated like the regular population would be treated of women, people who are in custody. And I don't know this for a fact. I don't know a whole lot about the way the jails are run there in Madison County, but it is a very conservative area. You're talking about an area that views women in a particular light. Maybe they are given some sort of a differential treatment based upon that philosophy towards females. In Eastern Idaho, I don't know, but that's not going to be the case where she's being housed now. Now she's going to be in solitary. She's going to be treated like other people who are in solitary in max, who are facing this charge. So I don't think that deferential treatment is going to happen here, but we only have so much control. Ada County only has so much control over certain aspects because it's still Judge Boyce. It's still his prosecutors. It's still the Madison County and Fremont County attorneys. So those aspects that they control, it seems that they are still giving, I don't know if it's deferential to her, but it's definitely deferential to the case, that they're giving different sort of treatment to this case than they would, I think, any other case. I don't think Ada County would have done it that way.
So I can't comment on this particular case, but I have previously worked in prisons doing competency to stand trial cases. One technique that the prisoners use there is they're given Kool-Aid packets for their drink. You mix the Kool-Aid packet with the icing on the cakes that they get, and it creates makeup. So you can definitely find a way, where there's a will, there's a way to make yourself look a little bit better if you can.
Jennifer M. writes, justice for JJ and Tylee. And of course, whenever you're covering true crime, one of the pitfalls is that sometimes you get so involved in the drama, you forget the actual victims. And I know Lori has been very vocal. Kay and Larry Woodcock, the grandparents, have popped into our chat from time to time. I don't see her today. Obviously, she's very preoccupied with what's going on right now. But Lori, you wrote something interesting in your blog, the Lori Vallow story. And the question is, who is a victim? What is the latest? I believe the judge still needs to rule on whether or not they're going to be allowed to sit in the courtroom. Again, these are the grandparents. Where do we stand on all that right now?
Unless the judge ruled this afternoon after they were finished with jury questioning, he's yet to rule. Both sides were given the opportunity to file written arguments, and their deadline was Friday at 5. So the earliest he probably could have ruled would have been this afternoon, and I didn't hear anything about a ruling. I do know Larry and Kay are traveling, so that's probably why you're not seeing them on social media. So I think they're on their way here. I don't know how soon they're expected, but I do know that they are hoping to be here within a day or so.
Dr. Marinakis, they questioned someone today at 10:40 in the morning, their time, and they were questioning a potential juror. I believe this was a state, and this person was an administrative assistant at a crime lab, and the woman explains what her responsibilities were and makes it clear she had nothing to do with actual testing. They ask if the woman's employment at the lab will affect her ability to be fair to all sides. The woman said she can be fair. Would you allow someone who works in a crime lab to be a juror if you were working on behalf of the defense? And if not, why not?
Well, she would probably be towards the top of my list for someone to excuse, but you only get so many strikes. You can only get rid of so many jurors. If they say they can be fair, you've got a limited number, so you have to prioritize them from there. But I would imagine that anyone that works closely with police and law enforcement, anyone would be a concern for me. I think there also is some things to be said about technique there. One thing about jurors is they want to say yes. I mean, this is really true about anybody. People want to say yes more than no matter what the question is. So if you're the defense and you're trying to get that juror to say they can't be fair, you don't want to ask them, can you put that aside, or can you be fair and impartial? Instead, you want to start with some of the softer questions, like, do you think your experiences might influence your judgment? Would that cause you to lean maybe even just a little bit in favor of one side or the other? You have to get your foot in the door first, because people right out of the gate, everyone wants to say they can be fair. You really got to make sure that the jurors can look within and introspect, is this going to influence me in any way? Because if it does, then that's not appropriate here.
One of the things that juror was responsible for was the workflow for rape kits. And that, for me as a defense attorney, that sort of sent a red flag off for me. There's been a lot of controversy about the rate at which rape kits are tested, and there's been a lot of big backlogs, and I don't know, that just set off some red flags for me.
Carrie Witt writes, why against cameras? We paid for the trial. Shouldn't we see it? This comment a little extreme, but the way some people feel. From Susan, I think this judge has a crush on Lori Vallow Daybell. He's gone beyond and above to cater to her, followed Jessica by KCL. Yes, Joel, please get Jessica Bublitz back on tomorrow. I love what she is sharing. Jessica's super smart and adding a lot to the conversation as always. 10 a.m., they were discussing media and news coverage. The attorneys, they said there's a lot of things out there that quote unquote aren't true. And a lot of things on the news won't be presented in the trial because they aren't relevant to the case. They're asking jurors to, if they can set everything aside that they've heard before and only rely on what they hear in the courtroom. And they ask the jurors if they'll have difficulty doing that, and calls on one to answer. And that person who was called on says she had not heard anything about the case. But Dr. Marinakis, we live in an information world. I mean, literally instantaneous information. How realistic is it with a trial of this magnitude, this high profile, that someone's not going to catch something on the news and potentially be swayed? How do you negotiate that?
There's just a lot of people, especially in smaller towns, that their concern is putting food on the table. They're going to work and they're not watching a whole lot of news. So to us, it seems absolutely unbelievable that someone could not have heard about the case. But for many families, they just don't follow the news. They've got bigger things to worry about. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to expect jurors to hear about the case or not. What we also see very common happens is that the jurors just seeing the name of the victims or seeing the name of the defendant doesn't ring a bell. But at some point in the trial, they hear something like, oh, she was in Hawaii, and that triggers something. I do remember this case. I remember hearing about a mom that was in Hawaii while her kids were missing. So sometimes they need to hear the details before they really know that they recognize the case.
So again, they're going to be picking 18 jurors, 12 who are going to be sitting on the actual jury, 6 alternates. We saw that they went through quite a few alternates in the Alec Murdaugh trial. If I'm not mistaken, I think they went through them all. We're up to the final one. Lori Hellis, this question was posed. This is off of all the jury stuff now. Very big picture question that was posed in a media publication out of the UK. So there's obviously global interest. And the question went this way: how could a woman who for years appeared to be a loving, doting mother allegedly murder her children in the belief that they had turned into zombies? Are you any closer to being able to answer that question? What happened here?
Well, I do think that she showed signs and symptoms early on that were overlooked for a number of reasons. A lot of the things that were happening at home. Colby Ryan talks about her threatening to drive them off a cliff because she was going to have to take Tylee to visit with her dad, Joe Ryan. And Tylee was quite young at that point. So there were red flags that showed up along the way. But she was very charming. She was very bubbly. She was the high school cheerleader. She was blonde. She was persuasive. I think that she was able to gloss over a lot of the things that gave people concern. And I think add to that the fact that her beliefs got more radical and more got darker over the past few years. So we've heard about people talking about 2015, 2016. She started really talking much more in depth about some of these dark ideas that she had. So I think it was a combination of people overlooking some of her funny foibles early on, and then things getting darker as she went along.
Chico's mommy writes, a friend of the show, good to see you back. Missed you as well. Chico's mommy, thanks so much. Followed here by Corrine Downs. Greetings, STS folks. I've made the live England here. Love when England shows up. I was just quoting an English media outlet who was discussing this case. So it has interest across the pond, as they say. Emma Rose writes, I'm sure Lori is loving the secrecy and extra security, ego on steroids. So many different opinions here and thoughts. Jessica, to you, um, both Lori Vallow Daybell and Chad Daybell are each charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and grand theft in connection with the deaths of JJ and Tylee, and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder in the death of Tammy. Obviously, a super broad question, but is the defense here going to try to pin this on another dead person? There's 5 bodies, I believe, that have piled up, and that person is Alex Cox, who's also responsible for the death of Charles Vallow. If you were defending bad Lori Vallow here, would you pin it on him as a strategy? This guy seemed to be everywhere where there was smoke, so maybe there was fire too. What would your strategy be in a nutshell?
Well, you can't just pin it on Alex Cox because they already know, or it seems to me from reading the jury instructions, that the prosecution is acknowledging that Alex Cox was the person who committed the actual murder. However, the question is what evidence they have of the conspiracy. The conspiracy is the agreement between the 3 of them. So you can't just pin it on Alex Cox because that's not what this case is about. It's not a whodunit. It's about the conspiracy of the 3 of them working together and what is the evidence of that. And when you look at the jury instructions, what's interesting is they're going to be painting Lori as just a basically fundamentally horrible human being. And the reason I say that, you talk about the grand theft, they're going to be talking about how money was a driver for her as well. They're going to be talking about how collecting Social Security benefits of her own children was a driver as part of this conspiracy. So it's really difficult for me to tell. The defense strategy must be, from what I can glean at this point, that no, she didn't have anything to do with it. Whatever the evidence is that they have of the agreement, it's just between Alex and perhaps Chad, but that Lori wasn't part of this agreement. Without knowing how strong their evidence is, though, I don't know how much water that's going to hold. So, I mean, as a defense attorney, what you really have to do is you have to see what is all the evidence and then make sense of that. And right now, we don't know what that is. From the jury instructions, it seems like a hodgepodge of various information that they've put together. And I don't know how strong their case is. One of the questions to the jury was, if we can't prove how the children died, is that going to be a factor for you in the case or something along those lines? And I'm thinking, wait, what? You can't prove how the children died? Is that really true? So some of this stuff is going to be what can they prove? What can't they prove? What evidence do they have of this agreement between the 3 of them? What evidence do they have that she procured or aided and abetted this happening? That's the question. And then once you see that evidence, then you can say, okay, what is the explanation for this from the defense standpoint? What is the justification or the explanation? But right now, so much has been hidden as far as information in this case. It's difficult to get a good read on what the evidence is. All I can really tell is I don't think that this is a whodunit. I think that this is what's the conspiracy? What's the agreement? And what was the aid and abet? What was her activity procuring this or making this murder happen? Was Alex the enforcer? That's what their evidence needs to show. And I just don't know yet what they have to show that.
That's interesting nuance there. Julia Raker writes, welcome to the Lori Vallow trial, a trial that has all sorts of screwy rules that aren't like anywhere else. Followed here, Dr. Marinakis, by Cindy Neufeld. So most of the jury pool is LDS, Latter-day Saints. I don't know if that's true or not.
No.
As well.
No.
No.
It won't be. No, it won't be. Not out of Boise because they moved venue. So yeah, the jury pool is now Ada County, and it's
Ada
not.
County.
It's probably 15% LDS in Ada County.
So, Dr. Marinakis, that's my next question to you. I mean, one of the things people have been talking about is the religious orientation of the jurors. How important for you, if you're consulting on this, is religion in the pecking order of things that are important?
Usually not in most cases, but in a case like this where there is, religious connections to how they all know each other. If there's some sort of appeal that this was a message from God, that she had a mission, that certainly plays a role. And so you want to learn about people that may have a blinding faith of their religion, may be concerning if you're on the prosecution side. To me, it's not really clear how far they're going to go into mental health insanity type defense, or whether it's really going to be based on, as you say, trying to just deny that there was an agreement and putting it more on other people. I just haven't seen enough to know which direction they're going to go in, but there seems to be little breadcrumbs that certain jurors could grab onto, whether it is the mental health piece or religion piece or a female piece in a relationship piece. Those are all things that the defense can use as tools to just create that reasonable doubt.
Yeah, they can't go into the mental health piece. They can't because they didn't give their notice, and they said they weren't giving their notice. So that's a piece they're not going to be able to go into, not from the defense side.
So yes and no. I think that they're very concerned on the defense side that the state is going to bring up her odd religious beliefs and attribute them somehow to her mental health and open the door on that conversation.
So. That's what's interesting. They dropped the ball. I mean, you guys brought it. You brought it. You brought the direction it would go. But
I've also seen some of the pleadings where they very specifically have said, we want a motion in limine that says that the prosecution cannot do that.
Can't go there. And they're the defense. And they're saying the prosecution can't go there. You guys you're hitting the nail on the head. The defense would be that she can't form the intent because of a mental health cross with cultish beliefs, etc. They can't go there. And they've actually asked the prosecution not go there. And the prosecution was like, wait, what, really? We can't go there? You don't want us to go there? And then they had to rethink their whole thing and say, wait a minute, no, we would like maybe to introduce some mental health / religious aspects in our case in chief. How did the judge rule on that? Because I never saw if he's going to let them do that or not.
I haven't seen that either, but I think that it has been a theme in this case. When does religious extremism become religious delusion? And where's that line? So it's definitely been a theme in the case. And I have not seen whether the judge has issued a motion in limine on it or not.
Lori, I'm curious because I'm writing a book myself right now. How this, and my book is streamlined. It's going to be advice from my Holocaust survivor / licensed therapist mother. I got a book deal for those of you who don't know, and I'm in the process of writing it, but that's pretty straightforward. I write about the insanity that is my mother and I's relationship. This is a million different roads, different avenues, detours. How are you tracking all this? Are you taking notes in court to try to keep yourself straight? And how do you deal with the writing process with all this?
So I am taking notes in court. I will be listening once again when we get to the important testimony. I'll be re-listening to the audio as well. I've done some interviews. I'll be doing more interviews once we're post-trial. And of course, once the trial is over, then the Freedom of Information Act exceptions don't protect them. They're going to have to release a lot of that discovery material. So I'm going to be looking through the same discovery material that they've been sorting through.
Wow. We had Michael DeWitt on, who's writing a book about Alec Murdaugh, and I was thinking the same thing. That's a hard thing to put together because there's so many rabbit holes you can go down. Harold Dull, friend of the show, anything but dull. Welcome back, Joel. Missed you, brother. Missed you too, man. It's good to be back. Jenny Meow Meow trying to frump her up like they did with Jodi Arias. What is this comment? Catherine Rieger. Of course, we're back. Love to Joel and Carm. Aloha. This is a sentiment among so many people here. It's like everything is a big secret. One thing that's not a secret, Lori, back to you, is really chilling photos captured JJ and Tylee and Lori's brother Alex Cox on a visit to Yellowstone National Park on September 8th. That was 2019, I believe. That photo is now believed to be the last proof of life of 16-year-old Tylee. She was never seen or heard from again. A couple of days later, on September 22nd, JJ was also seen for the last time, this time at his school in Rexburg and by his mother's friends at her apartment that night. He had autism, and by the next morning, he had vanished. And then you move forward a little bit, and cell phone data places Alex Cox in the yard of Chad Daybell's property in the hours after both of the children disappear. And he writes, Chad writes a text to Lori saying that he had shot a raccoon and buried it in the pet cemetery on the grounds of their property. So much craziness here, and that appears to be some sort of code. But I guess to the same point as I was just asking Jessica, and being that you're an attorney, are they going to try to pin this on Alex, who's no longer on this earth? Is that going to be the strategy?
I think absolutely. I think that's been the theory of the case all the way along. Well, I think that's been Lori's theory of the case. I think Chad's theory of the case is I wasn't involved in any of this nefarious activity. It was all Lori and her brother. And I was simply swept off my feet by a blonde femme fatale. So I think that's where they're each going. I think the most heartbreaking photos, you see a photograph of the night that JJ, the last night anyone saw JJ in red pajamas. And at Chad's preliminary hearing on the earlier charges, Detective Hermosillo talked about attending the autopsy, and he was dressed in red pajamas. So it's fairly clear that his death happened that night because he was still in his pajamas.
Jessica, to you, Lori Vallow claimed in divorce documents, this is Charles Vallow claiming that Lori Vallow in these divorce documents believed that she was a godlike figure chosen out to carry the work of 144,000 believers. And then multiple friends cited in police reports that the couple believed, and this is Lori and Chad now, that they could drive out evil spirits and seek revelations from quote unquote beyond the spiritual veil. Is this going to be admissible? All of this stuff?
Yes. One of the allegations in the conspiracy jury instructions, which I thought was really interesting, was it says, and I should have pulled those actual jury instructions so I could be completely accurate for you, but it's something along the lines of the individuals decided to engage in religious beliefs in order to justify the commission of murders. It
Right.
seems
That's
to me
in the
the prosecution's take on some of this is that they believe these were false beliefs, that they believe that these were not actual true beliefs held by these individuals, and that Lori, and that's why I say they're part of their strategy is that she's devious and awful in so many ways and conscious of this, that she's not just unaware or caught up in some sort of cultish fantasy that disengages her from reality. Their take on this is that she knew very well that these beliefs were untrue and that she pretended to hold these things, or at least told herself that she held these beliefs in order to justify the murder. So since that is part of one of the steps in furtherance of the conspiracy on the jury instructions, it's definitely going to be something that they're allowed to go into.
Carrie G writes, Dr. M, the theatrics are incredible. Knowing Lori has to use her looks presentation to appeal to the jury. What part of a trial, because we've had Tim Jansen on a lot. He's a criminal defense attorney out of Tallahassee. He joined us for a bunch of different cases. He talks about how it is theater, and he gets himself riled up and he starts rattling off questions. He switches into criminal defense mode, and he's really captivating when he goes there. But back to this about the theatrics being incredible. How important is that to a trial?
It's extremely important. Oh, sorry.
No, Dr. Marinakis. Dr. Marinakis.
The theatrics, it's more about it's storytelling, really. It's getting the jurors to be engaged. And so I think you certainly want to have a catchphrase. I think I mentioned that in previous episodes before, that having a catchphrase is important, getting people to engage, but it's more in the end about telling a good story that's going to fit with the jurors' pre-existing beliefs and their expectations of the world. And but you certainly can lose jurors by not being theatrical enough. You don't want them falling asleep on you or feeling that you don't have the conviction. And I think that's the theatrics that show that you believe in your case.
And Jessica, do you want to jump in on that?
Well, that was an interesting take, because I wasn't thinking theatrics of the attorney themselves. I'm thinking theatrics of the whole. You have to be aware that jurors are watching and looking at everything and taking everything in. So like, for instance, with the Murdaugh trial, they were taking in who he was or who they believed him to be and how false his presentation seemed to be. That sort of theatrics. The defense attorney should not be the show. The neither attorney should be the show or should be theatrical in that way. The attorneys should be able to channel a message and should be able to channel a feeling within the courtroom for the jurors to absorb. And it should never be about them. They should be able to bring out what they need to bring out from everyone there, and to get at the truth of the person's on the stand, for example, to pull out who they really are or to pull out whatever message they're really trying to pull out. But you have to be aware that the jurors are watching your client. They're watching their expressions. They're watching what they do. They're watching the judge. They're watching how the judge reacts to everybody. A lot of times they'll give a lot of credit to the judge's emotion or responses to what they're seeing. They're watching they're absorbing everyone on the stand on whether or not they find them credible or not credible. So in that way, it's theater. I don't think of the attorneys themselves as being theater. Not if they are doing what they need to be doing. They should be aware of everybody else in the room.
KCL writes, Joel and STS Nation, I've been sharing with my friends around social media that you're a great resource with content on this case and the best guests. Definitely the best guests. And KCL, I really appreciate that. That is one of the best gifts that you can give us, is just sharing the show with friends so we can try to continue to grow it. Here, Lorna writes, Lori has aged fast in jail. Jessica, you said Ada County is no joke compared to where she was being housed. Does it surprise you that she's looking a little weathered already?
It does, especially because I don't see, or I haven't seen the internal stress that would create the aging process either. I mean, when she's on camera, at least, and this is what I'm talking about when I say theater, from what I can tell, she doesn't seem to be someone who internalizes any sort of real concern, stress, distress, worry about her children, anything that would actually age a person. So what you're seeing is a very superficial aging. You're seeing the aging that comes from simply not dyeing your hair or, not having access to the things that she had access to give herself a good presentation, because presentation's obviously very important to her and has been very important to her. But I'm not seeing someone who's aging from stress.
Yeah. No face cream in jail, that's for sure.
Say again, Dr.
There's no
Marinak?
face cream in jail. The soaps there are not kind to your skin.
Right to the comment here from Delicate Flower. Lori has lost access to collagen and Botox injections, and then she added, and moisturizer. It's a good thing I'm not saying that and she's saying that, because it could be construed a different way. But
I do think, though, that for someone who is not accustomed to the environment of being in jail, to the regimentation, to the counts several times a day, those sorts of things, for people, the lack of privacy, for folks that are not accustomed to that, I think it is very stressful. And I think that's one of the reasons why we saw Lori really decompensate after she was put in jail. So she went to jail in early March, and by April, May, her attorney was saying, I have concerns about her competence. So I think she did a lot of decompensation as a result.
And thanks to Mary here. Jessica, this is a question with probably a really long answer, but a few people have asked it. We'll take this question, a couple more quick comments, and then we'll wrap it up. Catherine Stefan writes, why will this trial take so long, even more than Murdoch, that everyone seemed to already think was so long? You've got the experience in Boise. Why could this potentially be even longer?
It could take longer because of the nature of the charges. With the conspiracy counts in particular, they've got so many different pieces of evidence that it looks like they intend to produce. Whereas with Murdoch, it seems like it was a very straightforward, he was there, he's the one who did it, he lied about this and that. What really took a long time in Murdoch, and I didn't watch the whole Murdoch trial, I kind of kept up with it when I could, but it seems like there was a lot of financial information that came in. So that may have stretched that out a bit. But in this case, I think that what will stretch it out is all of these additional pieces of information to put together this conspiracy, like conversations that were had, steps that took place by the individuals involved financially, with regard to Social Security benefits, things like that. I think there are just so many different pieces besides just going into what happened, that presenting all of that evidence through various witnesses could end up taking quite a bit of time.
Casey writes, Plaskett writes, her new alibi is that she wasn't present when her kids died in Alex's apartment, so she knew they were dead, and because she didn't do it, she told no one and went to Hawaii and got married. LOL. Okay. Lori, there was I forget the legal term, pardon me, but it's a motion of alibi or something along those lines, and this was presented. Legally, what does that mean that she's presenting this alibi in court?
Well, legally, she was required to give notice if she intended to use any kind of an alibi. And essentially, she said she's going to be offering other people's testimony to prove that she wasn't there within Alex's apartment at the time that the children supposedly were murdered. But frankly, it's a pretty weak alibi, but they were required to give notice that they were going to at least raise it. So,
well, and the state said, "Who cares? We're not trying to prove you were there at the time." That was their response.
Right.
They said, "We're proving conspiracy and that she was a principal and an aid and abet. So we don't care that she says she has an alibi."
So some of the other information has come out, and again, we're going to wrap it up in a sec. But Lori claimed she could teleport between Arizona and Hawaii, according to documents. They believe that people, including JJ and Tylee, had become zombies. They allegedly also had a scoring system for ranking how far people's souls had gone from good to evil. The only way to then rid an individual of the zombies would be for them to die. Lori, I know you're not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. What the hell is going on here? Followed by this comment, which is right on the money. Carrie G. Gigi today apparently asked why Chad Daybell hasn't teleported out of jail yet. Great question from Gigi. One I would expect. What's going on?
I know that at some point she claimed that she had a portal in her closet and that she and Chad could connect in the portal. And I know that at one point she claimed that she could actually teleport herself through the portal But apparently she doesn't have a closet in her jail cell because she's not been teleported out of it. I think that this is a person who sincerely believes in these strange religious delusions. I think she believed that the world was going to end in 2021. She's been convinced that we were all so wicked and evil that Jesus didn't come back when he was supposed to. And I think she honestly believes that she will be found not guilty, that this is just another trial, and that somehow somebody's going to create an earthquake and the walls of the jail are going to fall down the way they did in the New Testament for the Apostle Paul. So I think that's where she's coming from. And I think it's a huge question of when does it become a mental illness?
That's the $64,000 or $64 million question. Dr. Marinakis, to you, we found out that tomorrow they plan on bringing in 3 more jury groups beginning at 9 a.m., 11 a.m., and 2 p.m. Just walk us through the process for tomorrow and the next couple of days in terms of rounding out this jury.
I mean, and I don't know the local rules as well as these ladies do, but I would imagine that you usually start with your hardship people, whether they can serve for the full 8 weeks. You go right to, have you heard about the case, high level stuff, and the judge is going to do their questioning, get some of the background information. The parties presumably are doing their social media searches of these jurors, and then are going to ask the follow-up questions to try to keep the people that they want and get rid of the people that they don't.
And that was the great Christina Marinakis. Over 20 years, she's been doing jury research, study, and applied practice in law and psychology. She's worked some huge cases like Minnesota versus Derek Chauvin, and most recently, Vanessa Bryant versus the County of Los Angeles. She is the real deal, as is Lori Hellis. Lori here, NAE 99. Any idea if there's any form of recording that may be released at the end or perhaps one day? They're supposed to be releasing the audio streams at the end of each day. Have you received it? What's the process with that?
I haven't received it, but I also haven't checked email while we've been chatting. So I do know that East Idaho News has said they will be ordering and will be making public the daily recordings. So they felt like it was a disservice to the public that people were going to have to pay by the day for those recordings, and decided that they were going to pay for them and then release them. So anybody who's looking for those recordings, you should be able to find them online daily. When they were doing a similar arrangement in Fremont County, if court ended at 3:30, usually by 5 o'clock, you would find the recordings. So
Sabrina writes, Lori Hellis, my husband says you look like Mariska Haggerty. I think she's from, is that Law and Order? I forget what show, but she's, there you go.
Well, thank you.
The husbands are watching you, Lori. You got to be careful here. For those who don't know, Lori Hellis, she is an author and a retired criminal defense attorney. She is the real deal. She's one of the OGs on this case. She's been following it from the very, very beginning. She has a blog, The Lori Vallow Story. She's currently writing a book. She's in Boise. She basically picked up her life and moved there to cover this trial, and no one knows it better. Give her a follow on Twitter, and she will give you very valuable information. What is your Twitter account? At Lori Hellis?
It's at Lori Hellis.
There you go. It should be at Good Lori Hellis, but right now it's just at Lori Hellis.
That one was taken.
And finally to you, Jessica, you're there. You're going tomorrow. What time do you have to set that alarm to get there? How early do you have to get there? And do you have to fill anything out tonight? Because I heard each evening you're going to have to fill out a form. I know you've got an assistant because you're a big time criminal defense attorney.
Yeah.
But what are you doing to prepare for tomorrow?
Well, I wasn't really doing anything to prepare for tomorrow. Are
you ready in?
Day by day in my I'll look at my calendar and go, oh, okay. No.
But is it a done deal? Are you
obviously-
definitely going in?
I will definitely go in. Yeah. 8:00. They don't open the doors until 8 at the Ada County Courthouse. And so, you can't get in any earlier than that. And I don't think they are starting the jury selection again until 9. Is that right? They're not going to get going until 9. You guys would know that.
Well,
Lori?
the trial court administrator said they were going to start at 8:30. They were going to take a very shortened lunch break and then finish at about 3:30 every day. So
Okay.
that's what they're saying.
Yeah, I'll pop in, and I think if I'm on the list, I can come and go as I want to, right? I don't have to sit there all day.
You can come and go in and out of the overflow courtroom. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll go in and out as much time as I can, especially if it's interesting. I'll stick around.
If you don't know her, you will, because she's going to be on our show a lot more than she thinks she is, and she's already getting courted by Court TV and I'm sure Law and Crime, but she is Boise, not Boise, but Boise lawyer Jessica Bublitz. She is a skilled litigator with more than 20 years of courtroom litigation experience. She's tried numerous cases in both state and federal courts and is the first woman in Idaho to be named a top 100 trial lawyer by the National Trial Lawyers. Your comments and your support has been amazing. Melinda Nagawaka writes, I love this podcast. Joel, so sorry for the loss of your dear dad. Wishing you comfort at this sad time. I feel so teary for beautiful Carm. My mom behind me, she is going to have a very difficult time. Everyone's sending their wishes, but once that dies down, that is the difficult time. And I will share a very short, quick thing that I found interesting. We've been having a lot of visitors, including some rabbis, and a rabbi came over today and he said to us, he was 90 years old, a very learned man, and he said that we are all mourners, and it's something that's inevitable. We all lose people. My father was a one-of-a-kind guy, but the same way STS Nation has given both my mom and I so much support, that comment, we're all in this boat together, all of us. We've all lost people. We've all gone through really difficult times, and for all the hate that's out there and the divisiveness, I just want you guys to know again how much we both really appreciate everything. And I promise not to get too sappy, but it's a strange time. Feel like I'm disoriented a little. So glad I could get through the show. Thank you guys for joining us. Really appreciate it. Again, tomorrow, Dave Leroy, the former lieutenant governor of the great state of Idaho and the former attorney general there, as well as Tara Malik, will be here, and maybe Jessica Bublitz as well. Love you, America.